Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today you'll be taking command of Athenian or Spartan forces in expansive conflict to rule the world of ancient Greece. You'll be leading your forces with legendary historical characters, directing the marches of armies and fleets to raid enemy territories, and laying sieges to valuable cities. Sparta is for 1 to 2 players. It takes 2 to 3 hours to play. It's for ages 14 and up and published by Plague Island Games. Now this game's on Kickstarter right now, so I'm going to show you how the game works and I'll see you on the other side. This is a Kickstarter preview, so all the art and components you see here are not final, they're prototypes. To see all the most up-to-date art and components, check the Kickstarter link in the description of this video. Now, as you can see, we have the board set up here for a 2-player war. There's actually 2 different wars that you can play. Each of these are 6 rounds long that go through different time periods. You could play either of them, or you could play a grand campaign where you actually play both of them back to back. Now there's some general setup things you'll do for every war, but then depending on the war that you're playing or the scenario, there'll be multiple different setup cards that you can use that change the war a little bit. So basically, even if you play the same scenario, there's different ways to set it up. For example, it shows you that players can place in different places and things like that. So each game will play a little bit differently, even if you're playing the same war, because of these different setup cards, and there's multiples depending on which war you're playing with. Now again, you're playing over 6 rounds, and what you're trying to do is at the end of this 6th round, have control of the most territories. So speaking of control, let's look at a region. So you can see that the regions are all denoted by different colors, and we're gonna look at influence at the end of both the game, and you're gonna be doing it each round as well, the game bonuses and such. But let's just pretend it was the end of the game here, just to show you what you're trying to do, is each of these players have 1 place that is controlled. Now this one is sort of worth 1 and this one is sort of worth 2, so this one actually, even though there's just 1 disc of each, this one would be considered controlling this region. Now if this was here, this one is worth 1, this one's worth 1, they essentially would be tied. Now over the course of the game, you're going to be placing influence here. Now if I were to place a single influence here, because it has just one level there, you would actually control it immediately. However, if you go and you place a control here or place some influence there, this cube just says that, hey, you're starting to get influence here, but you don't control it because you need 2 of them, hence the 2 icons above that. Now, if the other player, the Athenian player came over and put influence here, instead of putting it, they would just simply take yours off, sort of a zero-sum game there. But again, if the Sparta was able to put 1 there, then later on they put a second one, well, they have 2, and so now they would control this, and now they actually have a control of 3 versus 1 there. So that's sort of how influence and control works in the game. And again, at the end of the 6th round, whoever controls the most regions is going to be the winner. Now the first thing you'll do in every round is you'll do regional assessment. So you'll do exactly what I just said. And again, here, Sparta is the only one that has influence, and since they have control of this area, they will take this tile and take the bonus. This essentially is going to be 3 talents, which essentially is money in the game. Now each player will also get a state income of 3 during this section, and they'll take some of their rewards and their talents and such and put it here, because you're going to be using these money to place units and do things like that over the course of the game. Now some regions don't just give you talents, and maybe they give you different things. Like in this case, you're going to get some elites here. Now, those units up here, like elites, you might even start with some depending on the war that you're playing and such, but this is essentially like a level 1, and this is sort of a level 2, for example, and whoever has more in each of the elites, skirmishes, or cavalry, will put their colored cube here to say that they have the advantage in that. So right now, Sparta has the advantage in elites, and that's going to be important because each of these advantages is going to be worth +1 towards battles. Now, if you look at this region here, there's just 1 influence, but this one needs 2 in order to control it. So actually nobody controls this. So nobody would be able to essentially get this here to get the 3 talents. Now, after you do your regional assessment, in the first round, you go straight to basically drawing cards and going into the action round where players are going to be going back and forth playing cards. You'll get 6 each. Normally, there's a lot of other steps, but we'll go over those a little bit later. So when you play a card, you just do what it says. Like this says, spend 1 favor to gain a greater envoy, which is a large one into an uncontrolled megapolis. That's a level 3. And so like here in Corinth, that's a level 3, and I only have 1, which is great because the greater envoy allows you to basically add 2 to it, which in this case would allow me to totally control that because that's at a level 3. That's a Megapolis. So I could be able to play this and play this here, but I would need to spend a favor. Favor is a secondary currency in the game that you can gain with certain effects. And that's important because at the beginning of the next round, when we go through the assessment phase, nobody had controlled this last time. And if I do control this now, which right now I'm leading in control, I would be able to get this, which would give me an allied fleet, which would give me possibly an advantage during a sea battle, and it would give me a talent. So nobody owns it now, so it's here. So that's maybe what I'm trying to go for. Some cards might allow you to draw battle cards, and those are obviously going to help you when we're doing battles that I'll go over a little bit later. Now during your turn, you can do military actions like mobilizing. So in this case, you would spend 3 talents, and you can mobilize, in this case, maybe an army. So it comes here to show that it's mobilized, and then you have some ready leaders, and these will depend on your setup and things like that. But you put this here, and this shows you that this person is now sort of the leader of that army there. Now you could then spend 2 more talents to gain a battle card. It's one way to get cards that are going to help you win battles a little bit later. Now each player also has a Desperate Times token, and you can spend that to actually mobilize without paying anything. But then you'd actually immediately deploy and fight an enemy force. Now in this specific scenario that we were playing, we actually started with this like this, but I want to show you how you get them there normally. And in a future round, once you've mobilized them, in a future round, you will take these and you will deploy them. Now some rules when you're deploying, lots of things like, you can trace a straight line or a line through the different roads from your capital or a megapolis that you have, going through either neutral or places that you control. But anyways, we could come source like this. There's other rules too, but I'm not gonna go over all of them. You come here, and so now this has control from the other player, and you will begin to raid this. Now anything that's being raided no longer is under control. So if we were to assess control right now, this player would essentially not be doing this. They would still control this region because they still have this, but maybe you're trying to make a dent in that. Now that deployed unit will raid that unraided space it occupies, but not until next round, unless it's attacked and removed by enemy force before that. Now when you do raid, you will get 1 talent because you're sort of raiding that city. Then you can either decide to return home, which is like, hey, I'm just getting some money and returning home, or you can begin a siege. Now remember, you're only essentially raiding the round after you've gotten there. So it needs to have gotten there last round and not be removed from that enemy, right? And so now it's like a future round, and now you're gonna raid it, take a talent, and then decide to come home or try to siege it. Now if you had come home, this leader would be spent, and then that army would come back to here, and it would need a new leader some other time. Or in that future round, you could, instead of taking it home and raiding, you could start a siege, so you'd put a siege token on there. Now to prosecute that siege, you essentially spend 2 talents, but each siege can only be chosen once per round. Then you would roll dice. Now there'll actually be some custom dice in the game, but for this we just have some D6s, and depending on what we roll number-wise, certain things will happen. Now in this game, generally with these dice, 1's a failure, 2 or 3 is essentially a blank or nothing, and 4 to 6 is a success. Again, these will be custom dice showing you icons in the real game. And certain effects might allow you to add dice to your roll. You might be able to roll 2 siege dice, depending on where your army or your navy strength is, depending. And there's other effects that will give you more dice for sieging, but you'll never roll more than 3. But let's say we just rolled 1 die and we got a failure. Now, if you fail, you actually end up losing 1 army. Not likely to happen, but it could. But if we got a success, a 4, 5, or 6, you would actually reduce the enemy's influence there by 1 for each success. So by removing 1 influence, they only have 2, which means they don't control that anymore. Now, since you can only siege once per round per siege, it's going to take future rounds for you to come over here and take this control completely over. But again, they might come and get attacked by the other player's army or navies, depending if you're in one of these ports. That's how you'll do battles and stuff for the navies. But let's say over multiple rounds, we were able to get all those off. What would happen is the siege is successful. So you would come off and go back to your mat, your leader would be spent, and you would actually get to place a control disc right there. Oh, and by the way, if we were counting control, if this happened to have been the assessment, the regional assessment at the beginning of a round, we would have 3 and they would only have 2. So we would control this whole area. We'd be able to get a cavalry and 3 talents. Now, after prosecuting a siege, you could roll the die to abandon it. If it's a failure, you'd actually lose this person and the leader would be out of the game. But you could basically, abandon it. This would become a raid, and that would allow you to possibly raid there, on a future turn. Now, over the course of the game, you might have battles, both either in land or in sea. This would be a land battle, and at the beginning of the battle, you'll see where the battle strength lies. Number one, whoever has this, meaning they had control of this at this assessment, would have a strength of 1. And the Athenians did, because they have control here. They had the most control. Now here, the Athenians have more cavalry, but they have more elites. So it's sort of tied. They both got 1 battle strength for each of those. So right now, the Athenians are up 2-1. Now let's say also that they had more strength than them, so now it's up 3-1. So it's essentially a difference of 2. So here you would move this as the Athenians have a 2 battle strength lead, sort of going into when players are going to start playing those battle cards. Now players with anywhere between 2 or less battle cards can draw 1 at the beginning of the battle for free. Now, the attacker is going to start playing a card, and some of these can change assets. So, for example, this is a land battle. Reduce an opposing cavalry asset. Then you could reduce your elite asset to gain 1 battle strength. Now, let's just assume this is how it looked. This would be completely removed, and nobody would have that advantage, which means they're losing 1 battle strength, the Athenians who were in the lead. And it also said that we could remove 1. So this is a 2, it would flip to this. If it was that, we would remove it, but we still have this. So we just reduced their battle strength by 1, which means they're only at an advantage of 1 at this point. Whoever at the end of this battle, whichever side has the strength, is going to be the one that wins the battle. The interesting thing is the person who leads typically will pass, because, hey, they're in the lead. They don't want to play any cards. Puts it back to the other player. If both players consecutively pass, the battle's over. So if both players passed, Athenians would win right now. But the Athenians pass, it comes back to the Spartans. And let's say they play this, because you know what? We just saw that Sparta still has the elite advantage. They'd gain a battle strength. Now it's even. So you better darn wish that you know that this player is going to now start playing some cards. So players will go back and forth till both consecutively passes, and whoever is in the lead, that side wins and the other side loses. Now both players are going to roll dice for their leader fate. If it's a success, they get to flip this to experience, which gives them a more powerful ability. But there's other cards that might change things. Like we could have played this card during the battle, and then when rolling for leader fate, both leaders will use 2 dice, and the person that played this card gets to decide which number that is. However, if you had rolled a failure, this leader would be completely removed from the game. Let's just assume it was a success. Now, the victorious player reduces their army by 1, and the player that lost goes by 2. So now they're tied, basically, both have an army of 4. Now, all leaders involved in the battle would be spent, and their army would sort of come back there. Now, right now it's spent, but it is upgraded for later. Now, keep in mind that was a land battle, but you could have sea battles where there's ports. And the battle advantages would work similarly, but now you're going to see who has the advantage in fleets. That's a battle strength of 1, who has the better navy strength, and things like that. It works very similarly, but now some of the battle cards are only specific to land or sea, like this one here. You could use this on sea or land, or you could use this one on sea only, for example. Then players can go back and forth recruiting, spending 1 talent to recruit eliminated military assets. So maybe they wanted to bring back those cavalry and get that advantage back. And then people would rebuild. If there's still a raid out there that's not basically under siege, then it would get removed. Now, usually once you end a round, you're going to kind of go here, then you're going to go through some of the phases that I skipped over. Now, notice that there's 3 sections and 3 sections of cards. I have these separated out at the beginning of the game, because let's say we were going into this round. We're now in sort of a new age. And so what happens is the cards of this actually get added in from here, and they will get shuffled into the main deck. So as you start going through the different time periods, different cards are going to be shuffled in that deck, giving you different options. Then you change your army strength. So maybe it ended up like this last round, and whoever was the highest will go 6, whoever's on the lowest would go 5, unless of course they're at 0, then they would just go to 4. So it kind of sort of resets the army a little bit there each round. Then players can increase their navy strength. Like this Athens player could spend 2 to go up to 7. This one could spend 1 to now go up to 5, for example. Then you'd deal the action cards, 6 of them, and then you would go through playing those actions again. At the end of each round, you actually do the Olympics, where you'll be removing certain things that you didn't do, like certain leaders and units. Essentially, you'll be rolling dice to see if you're going to gain favor or talent. I won't go into the details of that. But at the end of this 6th round, whoever controls the most regions is the one that's going to win the game. Well, there is Sparta, and as I showed in the overview, you're trying to have the control of the most regions out on the board. And you're going to be doing so by placing those armies or fleets and having a lot of card-driven strategy in the game. Now, if you'd like to see all the latest art and components and all the different pledge levels available, you can click the link below me, and that's going to take you directly to the Kickstarter project page, and I'm sure that Plague Island Games would love your support.